Hi, I'm Dick Kughn, Chairman of the Board of Lionel Trains Incorporated. I spend a lot of time around the plant here in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and I know the work that goes into making a toy train. I don't mean just the work that goes on over at the administration building where I have my office. I mean every step in the operation, from the person who draws the blueprint to the one who paints the engine. I'd like you to see all the steps involved, from concept to completion. That's the reason for this video. You'll see how we make our most complicated product, a locomotive. And I can't think of a better engine to show than the 1/700E scale Hudson. Remaking the scale Hudson. I get goosebumps every time I think about it.
Lionel introduced the original scale Hudson in 1937. It was the finest single piece the company had ever made, one of the best made by any toy company anywhere. Modeled after the famous New York Central locomotive, it combined scale model accuracy with mass production performance and economy. It contained an enormous amount of detail never before attempted by a toy train company. The present-day Lionel decided to reintroduce the Hudson only after a lot of research and careful consideration. This is standard procedure at Lionel. It can take over 18 months of planning and preparation before a new item hits the production line. The process, whether for the Hudson or any other locomotive, begins with the marketing group gathering drawings, color photos, and blueprints of the prototype locomotive of the real world or a previously produced model. The engineering department then assigns a design engineer to the project, and a costing engineer is asked to do a feasibility analysis. Manufacturing engineering starts a search for existing tools and molds and solicits price quotes for new tools and molds if they're required. The manufacturing processes and routings are also worked out, how each piece will eventually be put together on the assembly line. Next, the marketing department examines the projected cost to determine if the product is feasible to produce at a reasonable price, in acceptable quantities, and in a timely manner. If it is, the project is then submitted to the highest executive level for final approval. Now other departments get involved. Purchasing gets firm component quotes from outside vendors. Lionel does not make all of its own parts, but an extremely close eye is kept on the quality of the work of outside suppliers. All must submit samples to be evaluated and approved before production quantities are made. The design engineer will build the first prototypes with sample parts. Quality assurance, or QA, begins conducting tests to confirm that the product will perform according to the design specifications. Throughout this period, the molds and dies are checked and fine-tuned. Lionel then introduces the product to dealers and begins to take orders.
After all the months of preparation, there finally comes a time when production begins. And it begins with this, a 22-pound bar of zinc alloy.
That zinc ingot, and hundreds of others like it, are melted at 900 degrees Fahrenheit at a Michigan die casting plant where the Hudson boilers are cast. The molten zinc is forced under high pressure into the casting tool. The two halves of the tool then open and the boiler casting is removed. It has a cylinder called a sprue attached to it. The casting is dropped into a liquid quench tank, which cools it, goes up a conveyor belt to a trim die where the sprue is removed, and over to a second trim station where excess zinc, called flash, is removed. At this point, the casting still has a seam running along its top. This is called a parting line, the line formed where the two halves of the casting tool meet. Hand sanding and polishing are required to eliminate the parting line, as well as other bits of excess zinc flash. There are 18 separate steps in the polishing procedure alone, and after every step, an inspector checks the work to make sure it's been done correctly and meets the high quality standards of Lionel. After sanding, the casting goes into a vibratory finishing machine. The casting is placed among thousands of tiny ceramic tiles, is swallowed by them, and gets tumbled for 20 minutes. The hard surfaces of the tiles bring a smooth and shiny finish to the boiler. Finally, the casting is dipped in a water-soluble oil bath that protects the casting from oxidation prior to painting. Next, the Hudson casting is taken to a nearby machine shop to be milled and drilled with the holes needed to hold the complicated piping and trim that will ultimately be attached. The casting is placed in a fixture where a computer measures the boiler front. From that precise measurement, it calculates the equivalent of 157 pages of additional measurements almost instantaneously. Then, at two computer numeric controlled machines, or CNC machines, the necessary holes are drilled. One machine puts holes in the cab, 16 of them, and a second machine makes holes that will hold the whistle, the bell, and various wire forms on the boiler. There are 72 of those. The smallest of these holes is made by a single solid carbide drill that is 42 thousandths of an inch in diameter. The frame is milled simultaneously on another machine. By employing the latest computer technology, these machines perform more than 200 operations, doing the work previously done by 30 machines and their operators. This has dramatically improved quality control, reducing defects to less than 0.5%. While the Hudson boiler is being cast, polished, and drilled, the Quality Assurance Department has been busy testing the motor. Six prototype Hudson motors were hand-built for life testing. Each was tested for 100 hours of running time, pulling a flat car containing lead weights, which simulates varying numbers of Lionel rolling stock. In 100 hours, each Hudson locomotive will travel a total of 166 miles. Those are actual miles, not scale miles. During life testing of the Hudson or any other Lionel locomotive, the power is cut periodically so the motors can be oiled. At night, or during times when no one is present, the test units are monitored by a computer. If for any reason any train stops, the computer automatically shuts down that track system and notes the precise time the run was interrupted. If any of the motors malfunction, the QA technicians and design engineers analyze the problem, correct it, and resume testing. Once the 100-hour run is successfully completed, there is much more testing which the prototype locomotives must endure. Each is packed in a specially designed master carton and placed on a device called the transportation vibration table, which knocks and bangs it all over a wooden platform. This simulates the movements of a truck traveling at 60 miles per hour over bumpy roads. This abuse continues for 2 hours. Afterward, the master carton is dropped on the floor 10 times from a height of 3 feet. If the contents are damaged in any way during these tests, the packaging is improved and the locomotive is tested again. The Quality Assurance Department was not the only place where tests were being conducted on the Hudsons. Over in the factory, other tests are conducted. The worm gear and linkage are tested to make sure there's no binding so that the linkage moves freely. This is being done in an area set aside for the Hudson project. Here, all the assembly tooling needed for the manufacture of the 1-700E were gathered together under the supervision of Manufacturing Engineering Manager Steve Ziemba. The tools have been brought over from the tool storage area, where over 20,000 pieces of equipment are kept on pallets stacked in racks 8 tiers high. Of those 20,000 pieces, half are stamping dies and half are molding tools. When the tooling from the original 700E arrived in the Hudson project area, each piece was either approved, repaired, or rebuilt if necessary. Then, parts made by these tools were sent to the Quality Control Group, or QC. Once approved by QC, each was returned with a green tag attached. As each component part for the scale Hudson was produced, reference samples were checked by quality control inspectors, tagged, and placed on a large reference board in the Hudson project area. The testing that goes on here differs from that in the Quality Assurance Laboratory. Prototype parts are tested here not for stamina, as in QA life testing, but for fit, to determine that they will work in production. Hydraulic presses and other machines in the project area are used to assemble these parts. This step of the production process is called subassembly. For instance, 4 parts go together to make the scale coupler for the Hudson tender. Putting them together is called a subassembly operation done on a subassembly line. When the coupler itself goes onto the finished tender, that's assembly done on the final assembly line. Before the subassembly line is started, Steve Ziemba assembles the parts. He repeats the process several times before asking the line assemblers to do it. They perform the operation until the most efficient manufacturing method is developed. The procedure is then passed on to the production line staff on the floor. This test run is done with each of the 500+ parts that will eventually make up the finished scale Hudson locomotive and tender.
One of the problems we encountered when piloting the 700E was that all the handrail stanchions and piping that we see on the outside of the cab have to be secured in place. That's done with small little U-bolts and stanchions, which are all bent over on the inside of the cab. The way old Lionel did that was each one individually was bent over with hand tools. We found that we couldn't do it very consistently and make the rails tight. To get around that problem, we've developed a metal mandrel which we force through the length of the cab, and it bends them over very consistently and makes the rails tight.
Wooden fixtures are often required to hold parts during subassembly. Some are even survivors from the day of the original Hudson. Others had to be designed for this job. One of those is a fixture involved in the delicate job of soldering the piping onto the boiler.
The tool makers in our tool room developed holding fixtures for each of the assemblies. This is the booster steam pipe, and it holds each of the individual components in a precise location and also shows line workers where they need to be soldered.
As each subassembly of the Hudson is developed and tested, it's stored in a labeled carton in the Hudson area. When all the assemblies have finally been built, they will be used for additional life testing and a practice production run. The Hudson area is right beside the tool room, where manufacturing engineers can readily consult with skilled tool and die makers about problems as they arise and immediately explore solutions. Although inventories of many of the parts required for the Hudson are concentrated around the Hudson area and the subassembly area, many more are stored in bins in the computerized inventory control warehouse. Installed in 1990, it contains 47 stocking locations in each of 4 bays. Thousands of small component parts are stored on movable shelves. The computer locates an item by part number, indicates how many are on hand, how many are on order, and how many are available. The computer can also locate the part and deliver it on request. When parts for particular runs are gathered together, whether for the Hudson or any other locomotive or piece of rolling stock, they're ready for subassembly. Throughout the production period, hundreds of Hudson subassemblies have been completed, everything from the pilot to the trailing truck. Here, a Lionel assembler solders together the injection overflow pipe in union, using the fixture and technique developed by the manufacturing engineers. But while work on the Hudson continues, so does the manufacture of other Lionel products. Much of this starts in the molding area, where injection molding machines turn out plastic parts at an average rate of 1 every 30 seconds. Of the materials that are molded here, the 2 most popular plastics are styrene, used for cars, and ABS, most often used in engine bodies. Plastic pellets are fed into the machines, and thousands of pounds of pressure are applied to mold the now melted plastic into the desired shape. The machines vary in size from 75-6, producing 75 tons of clamp pressure, to huge 375-32s with 375 tons of clamp pressure. The bigger the machine, the bigger the object which can be produced. The smaller machines turn out parts about every 20 seconds. The medium-sized ones turn out cars every 30 seconds. And the big ones turn out engine bodies every 40 seconds. The molders at Lionel are some of the best in the business, having learned their trade years ago in another hobby arena, when Lionel used to make model automotive kits. After molding, many Lionel parts must be painted and decorated. And here, too, Lionel employs a team of experienced production supervisors and operators. First stop for most Lionel products, the paint room. Here, the paint to be applied is matched with a sample paint chip to be certain that the color and type of paint that will be used in production matches the paint that was called out in the original specifications. Then, using a Zahn cup, the viscosity of the paint is measured. If a paint mask is needed for the job, it is first checked for imperfections and then set up. In recent years, Lionel engineers have researched and adopted the best techniques for painting with masks, keeping the colors on a multi-tone paint job from seeping onto one another. On a detailed paint job with a delicate stripe pattern, each mask is used only 4 times before it is changed for cleaning. 2 masks are used alternately throughout the painting process. While one is in use, the other is being cleaned. For simpler painting projects, a painter can complete a tray of a dozen cars before changing the mask. The paint room crew cleans the masks by dipping them in a hot soap solution for 5 to 8 minutes, then blowing off the paint residue with an air hose before repositioning them in their fixtures. Many one-color paint jobs are run through a semi-automatic paint machine. It paints a body shell with multiple spray guns and oven dries the paint. After a car body is painted, it goes to the decorating area. Some products that don't require painting go directly from the molding machines to the decorating area. Here, there are 2 types of machines that apply lettering and decoration: pad printing and hot stamping. Pad printing is the most complicated. First, an etching is made into the surface of the die plate. Ink is then applied, filling the depressions of the die. A silicone pad drops down, picking up the ink, and shifts forward to a precise location directly over the area to be marked. In a swift, exact motion, it drops down and stamps the car. Because this process combines science and art, it must be constantly monitored to be certain the pad contains the proper amount of ink. It also has to be cleaned on an ongoing basis to prevent smudges on the products. The decorating staff knows from experience when to clean, when to apply ink, and how much. The pad printing process can be affected by temperature and humidity. Pad printing is a versatile process, which is used especially on surfaces that are curved or uneven or on riveted areas. It is also the only decorating process used on die-cast locomotives. Hot stamp machines use a rubber silicone die that is pressed against a one-color tape, transferring the ink off the tape and onto the car in the image of the raised area of the die. It sounds complicated, but it is actually very simple and reliable. Hot stamping is used in relatively small areas, primarily in flat areas with little detailing. Temperatures on a hot stamp machine run from 400 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, thus the name hot stamping. The hot stamp machine is also used for multicolor heat transfers. It transfers the image from a tape that already has multicolor printing on it to a car with heat. It is nearly identical to regular hot stamping, but the difference is the complexity of the decoration. Heat transfer allows Lionel to create beautiful and complex graphics. Some jobs require a mix of both processes. The Northern Pacific passenger car is a good example. Because of the rivets on the green area, each had to be pad printed. The bead, or white stripe, and number were hot stamped, and the logo was heat transferred. The Disney tender has 6 pad print applications on each side and 1 hot stamp, a total of 14 operations, an enormous job for a mass-produced item. The decisions to hot stamp, pad print, or heat transfer come out of decorating meetings held many months before each item is produced. There are no snap decisions on decorating Lionel trains. Quality control is very much in evidence in the decorating department. A supervisor will examine each step in the decorating process, compare it with the blueprints from the art department, and take it to the quality control group. If they approve it, the car is placed by the machine. Each operator has an approved sample to compare his or her work with. In 1990, Lionel acquired a new multicolor pad print machine that will improve the process. The machine can mark a car with 2 or 3 colors at the same time. Older machines could only apply 1 color at a time. Also, in late 1990, the scale Hudson is almost ready for painting. But first, it has to have most of its exterior trim added. This includes pieces of piping that have long been familiar looking to collectors who might never have known their actual names. For instance, the booster exhaust pipe assembly and the booster steam pipe assembly, the feed water delivery pipe, the power reverse rod, the injection delivery pipe, the blower valve rod, and those pieces we saw joined by soldering earlier, the injection suction pipe and union assembly. All these are added, as well as more readily identifiable parts and some not so identifiable. After receiving a special phosphate coating that will allow the paint to adhere better, the cab boiler unit is ready for painting. The painting and decorating of the Hudson is less complicated than that of the pieces we saw a few moments ago, but it is no less carefully accomplished, including the delicate job of pad printing the number board. While the Hudson cab gets decorated, its chassis and motor are being assembled. Lionel assemblers have been carefully trained, and there is little wasted motion on the various assembly lines. Some procedures are slower or require more skill than others, and that is compensated for. There are two solderers, for instance. There's a lot of testing: the light bulb connection, the motor when it's added, with the E or reversing unit, with the smoke unit, and finally the entire chassis has to climb a 30-degree ramp in under 5.5 seconds. If any locomotive fails, it is checked and corrected. The chassis will now go to the final assembly line to join the cab. In the meantime, Lionel assemblers have been busy with the Hudson tender. The Hudson tender has been improved in several ways over its 1937 counterpart. The coal pile has been retooled to add detail. Nylon axle bearings have been used on the trucks for quieter and smoother operation. The frame has been redesigned so it can accommodate tighter radius curves. And through the magic of rail sounds, the whistle sounds are more authentic than ever. And now, after years of planning, months of preparation, and weeks of building and assembling, it's time for the final assembly. Carefully, the cab goes down the line, getting a detail added here, another there. Then, at last, it is joined with a chassis and motor. The Hudson is now a working unit. Final details are added. It is retested and tested once again on a loop to make sure it can negotiate 42-inch radius turns as its predecessor could not. It is a magnificent finished product. The work is at last done. The scale Hudson has returned, better than ever, as the beautiful 1-700E. The 1990 1-700E, a proud part of a long tradition of Lionel trains. A wonderful tradition that has brought families together at Christmas time, made them just a little bit closer throughout the year, and created collections of heirloom toys that have thrilled children and big kids throughout the generations.
In every arena, one emerges, becomes the best. In baseball, it was Babe Ruth. In popular music, Frank Sinatra. In the world of steam locomotives, it was the New York Central's Hudson. 1924, the steam locomotive was king. Passenger trains were the way people traveled, from city to city, state to state, coast to coast. And business was booming. Bigger engines were needed to pull longer trains faster. The New York Central's flagship steamers were the 482 Mohawk and 462 K5 Pacific. Their fireboxes had been expanded to increase power, but still more power was needed. Their one-axle trailing trucks could not carry the weight of larger fireboxes. Added to the urgency was the development of larger, more luxurious, and heavier passenger cars. These new Pullmans, diners, and lounge cars forced the New York Central to develop a new locomotive. A locomotive with four-wheel trailing trucks that could accommodate a still larger firebox, and a locomotive that would travel at high speeds. And so the design of a 464 locomotive was launched. The four-wheel trailing truck was new, but not untested. Lima's 284 Berkshire proved it could be done. The New York Central's favorite builder, American Locomotive Company, was given the job to produce this new locomotive. It would have all the latest technology and a newly designed tender with six-wheel trucks. This new engine would be a breakthrough, both in design and performance. It would be the standard by which all steam engines that followed would be judged. It deserved a name equal to the place it would occupy in history. Paul Kiefer, chief engineer of Motive Power, was with Patrick Crowley, president of the New York Central, when the new locomotive was named. Historian Al Stauffer recalls.
Pat Crowley says, well, let me think about that a minute. He had this big leather chair, you know. And Paul said he swung that chair around and he headed, gazed towards the west. He's in downtown Manhattan now, and he gazed towards the west. And he finally swung it back to Paul, and he says, let's call it the Hudson, from the Hudson River. And that is how it got its name.
Construction began in 1926. The first 464 Hudson, number 5200 J1A, was christened in Schenectady, New York on February 14, 1927. The future of the New York Central was riding on its 79-inch drivers. From the beginning, the Hudson was the best. It headed the most famous trains for the most famous railroad during the golden age of passenger service in America.
The Central schedule was to leave Chicago at whatever time, Then you'd go back to the bar and drink, go to sleep, and wake up, you'd be in New York City, yeah.
After the 5200 J1A, Hudsons were being produced as fast as the American Locomotive Company could turn them out. New features were added with each model, and the designations changed to reflect these alterations. There were J1Bs, Cs, and Ds. The J1Es were developed in 1931. The last J1E, numbered 5344, was fitted with new Timken roller bearings on the drivers and the tender. These roller bearings were a major innovation. They greatly reduced friction and break-in time. The 5344 became the most famous Hudson, and the one Joshua Lionel Cowan, founder of the Lionel Electric Train Company, chose for his prototype. (1935). Lionel survived the Depression and was looking forward to better times. Their line of toy trains was the market leader, but it didn't appeal to the new and rapidly expanding model railroad market. Model railroaders wanted full-scale trains, not whimsical toy trains. Cowan viewed this new market as an area of tremendous growth. About the same time, advances in the die-cast industry produced boilers with incredible detail. Cowan realized this new technology was his ticket to the emerging scale market. Always the aggressive innovator, Cowan had a vision. He would make a scale model of America's most famous locomotive, the New York Central's J1E Hudson, and make it so detailed and so good that the scale modelers would come to him. He leaped into the new project with great energy and $70,000. Just as the real Hudson revolutionized the railroad industry, the Lionel scale model would revolutionize model railroading. Nothing like it had ever been seen before. The Lionel scale Hudson was introduced on the cover of the 1937 Lionel catalog. Prior to Lionel's mass-produced Hudson, scale models were built by hand in limited quantities by small manufacturers. These smaller companies couldn't match the Lionel Hudson in either cost or in the amount of detail. Lionel's Hudson was pricey, but at $75, it was only about a fifth of what those small-run scale models cost.
It really revolutionized the type of engine that Lionel was making, because prior to that, everything was tin plate. Lionel added a lot of applied detail to the 700, the steps, the pilot, the piping, bells and whistles and valves. There were so many pieces of applied trim, and by making those pieces separately, they were able to attain even a higher degree of detail.
The 700 EW was a hit, particularly with the model railroaders. This was a source of pride for Cowan. He was now not only the leader in the toy train field, but in the far more demanding world of model railroading as well. He earned the modelers' respect and their business. Salesmen were given this handsome carrying case to transport the 700 EW to their various accounts. Highly detailed scale freight cars provided the Hudson with a fitting consist. They featured sprung trucks and scale knuckle couplers. The only area where Cowan fell short was with the passenger cars he mated with the Hudson. Rather than go to the expense of new dies for a line of scale heavyweight passenger cars, he simply painted the streamlined cars red that were used by the Hiawatha and Union Pacific M10000.
It's just the most spectacular thing that I think Lionel ever made, and I think it was the pinnacle of Josh's career. He put his heart and soul into the dies in making that piece, and reintroduced it over and over again because he just loved that particular piece. I love all the trains, but there's nothing like a Hudson. And I think if you survey many of the collectors throughout the country, you can still see that Lionel is associated with the Hudson. Even the scale guys back in pre-war days would buy 700Es because they were just the most fantastic locomotive at the time. I think the 700E, bar none, is the most spectacular piece that the corporation ever made, even though they've made wonderful, wonderful trains. There's nothing like a 700E. If you collect post-war, if you collect standard gauge, if you collect pre-war, everyone wants to have the focal point, which is a 700E in their collection or on their mantelpiece.
I've got to go with their slogan. It was the mighty engine of the century, and it truly is. To me, it's really the crown jewel of a collection.
A special version designated 700 EWX was manufactured to operate on tubular track. The 4 scale drivers were flanged, and the 2 middle drivers were blind. The 700T tender came with a tin plate box coupler to match with 800 and 2800 series cars. Lionel also made the Hudson available in kit form. An unassembled kit designated 700K, is the most rare and most valued of all the Hudsons. It came in 6 separate kits. The first 4 are the locomotive, the 5th is the tender, and the 6th is the whistle. Boilers were painted primer gray. The kit included black paint, a brush, and decals. Many assembled 700K Hudsons turn up still in their primer gray, probably because their builder was reluctant to ruin his model by painting it with a brush.
I know it's a sin for a lot of collectors to think about putting a 700K together because it's such a unique and hard piece to acquire, but I'd like to turn the clock back to 1938 or 39, and so yes, I have plans on putting one together, and please don't get mad at me, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's been my most favorite Hudson possession.
The Lionel scale Hudson was a masterpiece, the finest model of anything ever mass-produced in America. At $75, the scale Hudson cost 3 weeks' pay for the average worker. Lionel introduced a more affordable Hudson, the 763E. Designed to run on tubular track, the 763E cost half as much as the scale Hudson and came with about half as much detail. The first versions were painted gunmetal gray and came with a Vanderbilt-type oil tender. An extremely rare 2263W was made with black journals. In 1940, the 763E came with a matching 2226W coal tender. This version is the most prized of all the regular production Hudsons. The tender alone recently sold at auction for $7,500. The following year, the 763E and tender were painted black. The 763Es came with an assortment of consists, but the 2 most sought after are the semi-scale freight cars and the semi-scale Pullmans. The Pullmans, also known as Manhattan cars, had fine detailing and were more realistic than the scale Hudson's rail chief cars. The scale movement in the 30s also included HO gauge trains. Lionel countered with 00, a gauge slightly bigger than HO, but significantly smaller than O gauge. Since 00 gauge was also aimed at scale modelers, Lionel chose their best, the Hudson, to introduce the new gauge. 4 locomotives were produced, detailed and semi-detailed versions for both 3-rail and 2-rail operation. The 3-rail track was tin plate and came mounted in a detailed Bakelite roadbed. The 2-rail track was solid T-rail and also came mounted in a Bakelite roadbed. Some tenders came with whistles. Today, the popularity of 00 gauge is growing as collectors realize what splendid models these are. The detailing is remarkable, and with a little tweaking, they run as well today as they did 60-some years ago.
The 00 Hudsons were really remarkable. If you look at one next to a 700 O gauge Hudson, there's very, very few differences. The piping, the rods, the pilot, it's very, very similar to the 700. It's a remarkable model.
2 different carrying cases were available. Salesmen were given a flat case with a 3-rail set nestled in red velour compartments. Another case, bound in alligator, was a top award in an employee incentive program. A matching case for the 1041 transformer was also made. Lionel carrying cases are extremely rare,
and I had the privilege of becoming a good friend of Frank Pettit. During the pre-war years, Frank was a salesman, and he went from store to store and carried around various samples. And one of the samples that I was given the privilege by Frank to own is his 00 salesman set. I mean, what it is a black suitcase display set that the complete 38 set fits into it, and he could take it around from store to store. Or he would take the track out, hook a transformer and a little couple of wires to it, and run the complete 38 set in a loop for a potential buyer.
00 gauge was discontinued after World War II. A special 00 gauge Hudson was produced in 1950 as part of an exceedingly rare 50th anniversary display. It featured a landscape diorama and a 50th anniversary logo. 1946, Lionel released their first full-size post-war catalog. The Star was a new model of the Pennsylvania Railroad steam turbine locomotive. The catalog also included a 703 semi-scale Hudson with smoke, but it was never produced.
It was too expensive for them to make. Built 2 new engines in 1946, which would be the turbine and the Berkshire. Possibly they did anticipate that there was not the market after the war for the scale.
I mean, it's an interesting idea, and that's about as far as it goes with me. If they don't do it, it doesn't count.
A prototype 703 was made using a scale Hudson fitted with the smoke unit. The 703's tender, numbered 2703W, was similar to the 2426W tender. A light bulb smoke unit, part number 703-10, was produced and used in Lionel's 726 Berkshire. In 1950, Lionel celebrated their 50th anniversary by bringing back the Hudson. The 773 was a fine model and became the most collectible steam locomotive of the post-war era. The drivers were solid sintered iron to accommodate the new magnetraction, and the handrails were secured by 8 cotter pins rather than solid metal stanchions. The tender was a Lionel Lines 2426W, which was also used with the Berkshires. The steam chest came with valve guides, which is interesting because they were not on the more detailed 763E.
There was a meeting set up with Mr. Cowan. They presented the idea to him, and naturally Mr. Cowan went for it, not 100%, but 1,000%, because that engine was his baby. He loved the Hudson. And yeah, in 1950, we brought out the 773. First version, we had some problems with it. It wasn't running right, which we call the large stack feel in the Hudson. The second one, which was a much better motor, and it did the job for Lionel, was a short stack motor. And it had good pulling power, and that was the one that really made the engine a big hit. The way everybody looks at it now is an engine that they do want, because it does remind them of old Lionel.
50th anniversary, and they wanted a premier engine, and they claimed at the time that they weren't making much money on them, $50, but it was definitely less detailed than either the 763 or the 700. But I think they sold a lot more Berkshires and turbines than they did Hudsons, and in fact, back at the time, I can remember, I don't remember seeing any of them. There just weren't a lot of them around back then, and of course they're probably the most popular post-war Lionel steamer today as far as a collectible.
2 prototypes were made with the tender rubber stamp New York Central in silver. Both were used as models by the artist who illustrated the Hudson in the 1950 catalog. The 773 appeared again in 1964. The cab number was stamped in white, and the valve guides were eliminated. The tender was an indication of how far Lionel had fallen during the dark days of the 1960s. It was the plastic 736W with plastic trucks and was lettered incredibly Pennsylvania. That was like putting Joe DiMaggio in a Red Sox uniform. In 1965, Lionel made a half-hearted effort to rectify their blunder by lettering some tenders New York Central.
Not only was it the completely wrong tender, but it was lettered wrong as Pennsylvania, and which was an arch rival of New York Central to begin with. So it couldn't be wronger. It just couldn't be any wronger. Not to mention the insult of plastic trucks. So, and the following year in 65 and 66, they tried to make amends by putting some kind of bogus New York Central lettering on the tender, which again wasn't even close to the right style lettering. I mean, it just happened to say the right words, but the lettering was totally bogus.
Another interesting variation was created by the legendary Lionel dealer, Madison Hardware. The owners, Lou Shure and Carl Shaw, asked Lionel to make a special version with holes drilled in the drivers between the spokes. This made the solid spoke drivers look more like open spoke drivers. 1966 was the last year for the 773 Hudson.
There is a great romance, there is a certain nostalgia for the past, and I think the steam engine, particularly the Hudson, and even as a Lionel Hudson, brings back that nostalgia that we really don't find even with classic antique automobiles. And again, I think it gets back to the fact that you can see the rods, you can see all the action. This is a giant behemoth. The steam engine is the height of the Industrial Revolution. The propeller-driven aircraft, but still you don't get that same sense of power that you get with a steam engine. And a jet aircraft, like a pilot told me once, to him it's nothing but 4 kerosene heaters out there on the wing. He knows the principles, but he doesn't understand how it operates. But damn steam engine, you know how it operates. You see that driving rod, you see those valve gears, you see it hissing. I mean, it has noise, it has, every steam engine had its own identification by its sound, by its action. Again, this is something that a modern internal diesel engine or a modern internal combustion engine does not have. But the steam engines did. They were unique. And again, engineers, they were trained. They operated their specific engine. And they knew those engines, and by a sense of feel, by a sense of sound, they knew if they were functioning correctly.
In 1970, General Mills leased the Lionel name and product line, and a new era began. General Mills started slowly and gradually expanded in size and quality, building up to the time when they would reissue the Hudson.
When I walked in the door in 1978, the Hudson was on the table in terms of the plan. Everybody wanted the Hudson to come back. It was the pinnacle. It was what we wanted to do to make a very strong statement that the Hudson represents probably the best of what Lionel has been capable of in its history. The 783 was really the response to, and maybe late response to, consumer demand. We looked at it as a business plan that would enable us to ease our way into putting together the scale Hudson, to whet the appetite to get to the best, the cream. Kept getting a little more complex, kept getting a little bit more, a little closer to the ultimate product.
We had started looking at doing the Hudson as early as 1977. Did what we call a tool search to find the various tools to see which ones we had. We started again in 1980 on it. Well, actually, at the very first, we started to look at the 700E, and at that time at the company, we just thought it was too complicated. So in about 1980, we said, well, let's do a 773 then.
The 783 was the first modern-era Hudson. It was supposed to have valve guides, but sadly it didn't. Turns out the original tooling was modified in 1964, so guides could no longer be cast. But Lionel didn't give up. They made a separate tool designed to press the guides through an opening drilled in the steam chest. This process proved unreliable, so the idea was shelved. Another interesting feature on the 783 was steam chest smoke. This was first developed for the Norfolk and Western J. The tender was lettered New York Central in white. The font was the correct antique Roman used by Lionel on their pre-war Hudsons. 783 is pad printed on the tender's back panel. Magnets were added to beef up the magnetraction.
Magnetraction is, you know, a good Lionel trademark and something we want to do, so we said we would try to make it stronger, make it a little better. So we put the additional magnets on the bottom of the frame as well as the ones that are on top of the worm housing cover.
The item number of the 783 is 6-8406, the 4 indicating it was produced in 1984. Originally, it was going to be produced in 1983, but the production problems in Mexico delayed the project. Lionel felt this was the most powerful steam locomotive the company ever built. In addition to the stronger magnetraction, it featured a long stack motor. The market value immediately doubled upon its release.
It was quite a feeling of accomplishment. We were happy that we ended up building it in Michigan, in our plant here in Michigan. We had built a large display board as sort of a visual aid to show the people how to put it together, and that hangs in our lobby.
The success of the 783 proved there was a market, so Lionel wasted little time in producing another Hudson. In 1986, Lionel introduced the 784 Boston and Albany Hudson, and with it, a new marketing plan. The idea was to sell directly to consumers, leapfrogging their dealers in the process. Not surprisingly, their dealers were outraged. A direct mail order form was sent to over 30,000 members of the various collector clubs announcing the B&A Hudson. A set of standard O cars was also offered, including 2 new cabooses. One was lettered for the B&A, the other for the New York Central. While the marketing plan alienated dealers and probably limited sales, the B&A Hudson and the standard O cars became some of the top Lionel collectibles of the 80s.
The Boston and Albany was an experiment. And there were 2 camps of consumers. One group who embraced the idea of being able to buy direct because it was ultimately the best deal. There was another camp that said, you're cutting off the lifeblood of my dealer, I'm not happy, these guys do a whole lot of support for you, which is very true. I think it was a good experiment. We learned a lot of things from it. Obviously, we didn't pursue it. I think it was a really great second product for that category.
Fundimensions spun off Lionel to Kenner Parker, who subsequently sold it to Richard Kughn, a hometown boy and Lionel collector who made it big in shopping malls. During all this, Lionel was returning production from Mexico back to the United States. The next Hudson, The 785 was produced under much more stable conditions. The 785 Hudson commemorated the 50th anniversary of the scale 700E.
Why they chose gray, I don't know. I think even though it's probably the best of those engines, or those early Hudsons, quality-wise the best engine, it just doesn't command anything. It's whoever saw a gray Hudson, I mean, you know, it's silly.
The 785's best feature was the open spoke drivers with steel rims, which were reminiscent of the pre-war 763E. The tender was lettered New York Central, and even though it had no prototypical basis, the 785 is a unique and handsome model. The 785 came with a small plaque acknowledging Lionel's Hudson heritage. A matching caboose was also offered. It was a plastic reproduction of the pre-war semi-scale caboose. It was nice to have semi-scale Hudsons, but what collectors really wanted was the grandest model of them all, the 700E. Richard Kughn knew what a 700E would mean to the hobby and to Lionel. So he launched plans to produce a new scale J1E Hudson in time for Lionel's 90th anniversary. That story is documented in part 1 of this series, the making of the Lionel scale Hudson. At first, the new scale Hudson was to be numbered 5390, the 90 chosen for Lionel's 90th anniversary. However, no J1E Hudson was ever numbered 5390. So Dave Garrigus, an avid Lionel watcher and train historian, called to tell Lionel they had the wrong number.
Well, 5390 was not a J1E Hudson. In fact, I'm not sure there was any Hudson with that number, but it was certainly not a J1E. So I had conversations with Lionel, and they finally decided after a while to change it to 5340, which is a correct number, and it would still be different from the original 5344 700E.
You know, you're always trying to innovate, and you're always trying to be clever. Sometimes cleverness is not as well researched as you'd like it to be. But in this particular case, we said, let's do 5390 because 90 is the year. You know, I mean, this will kind of tie into what we do with locomotives on a regular basis, where we had a numbering system that actually had reference to the year in which they're produced. So, is it unusual for people to know more? Yes, but there it is, and you know, we'll accept it. It's good. It's a good thing.
Actually, 5390 was a number used on a New York Central Hudson, but not a J1E. A J1D, originally numbered 6615, was renumbered 5390. A one-of-a-kind gold-plated scale Hudson was produced for longtime Lionel employee Lenny Dean. It commemorated Lenny's 50th anniversary with the company.
I made 50 years with Lionel, and Mr. Kughn threw a little party at Car Rail, and this was presented to me that evening, and I was surprised and happy at the same time because I got an engine that spelled Lionel by itself. And that meant a lot to me.
Lenny is a Lionel icon and is still going strong, promoting his favorite train company. With the scale Hudson, Lionel's list of Hudson reissues was complete. Now there was only uncharted territory ahead. A new scale market was thriving. And once again, Lionel found itself viewed primarily as a producer of toy trains, not scale models. The new scale modelers wanted accurate and precise details. For this degree of scale and accuracy, the discriminating modeler turned to the brass model industry. Brass models are exceptionally fragile. They dent and break easily. They also cost far more than comparable die-cast models and require patience and discipline to operate. Lionel decided to enter this market, and together with the Smithsonian Institute, announced a brass model of the New York Central's classic Dreyfuss Hudson. Lionel contracted with Fine Art Models of Detroit to produce a two-rail locomotive with matching passenger cars. Lionel gave Fine Art a free hand at designing, and Fine Art did not disappoint. They created exquisite models which command appreciation and respect from even the most punctilious modelers. The two-rail locomotive was offered with 5 different cab numbers and 2 13-car passenger sets. One set represented the eastbound 20th century and the other the westbound. The cars have fully detailed interiors and illumination. The locomotive was priced at $2,500 and each car $500. The sets were sold on a subscription basis, one car arriving every month. Both the locomotive and the cars are considered the finest O-scale models ever made.
That engine broke new ground in modeling. There were features on that model at that time that had never been done on brass imported models. Things like the detail of the opening hatches was very good because they modeled the piping detail behind the hatch covers, never done before. The accuracy of the model on the exterior was excellent, first class.
Fine Art Models also produced a 3-rail version of the Dreyfuss Hudson for Lionel, but it was not as detailed as the 2-rail version. Lionel's model of the C&O Streamliner Hudson began with a phone call from Lionel owner Richard Kughn.
Dick Kughn was at York, took a ride over to the Baltimore Railroad Museum, saw that the 490 was there, that particular Hudson, and called him and said, I want to see that as a Lionel product. So then, hence became a product.
Lionel designers went to the museum and shot photographs from every angle, noted proportions, listed the construction materials, and measured the interiors and exteriors. At the same time, they began to research the C&O Hudson, checking books, blueprints, photographs, and historical documents. The C&O was important to the design staff because it was a totally new design, and it would be completely done in-house. To save time and money, the chassis of the 700E was used as a foundation. The first step in the design process was to make a styling drawing to show how the shape of a C&O Hudson would look in O gauge on a 700E chassis. Specific details such as rivets and wheel spokes were not included. Next, a 3-dimensional study model was made of foam. This model was carefully examined to make sure the general appearance and proportions were correct. Since the model was made in foam, alterations could easily be made. A more detailed model was then made out of wren shape, a sturdy, more dense foam that cuts like butter. This model showed the final shape of the cab, including the interior edges and spaces. Parting lines were established, and smaller parts, like trailing trucks, were also created to make sure they would fit. After more tweaking, another handmade model was crafted. This model included details like rivets, panels, and window struts. Next, a rubber mold was made, which was used to make a urethane casting. This casting was used to make this design model. The design model showed how the finished engine should look and was used by marketing, design, and finally engineering to make the final production model. The C&O was the first Lionel steamer to come equipped with the new Trainmaster Command Control. It also featured rail sounds too, which included a deeper chuffing sound and a more throaty whistle.
Well, from what I've heard, I think Lionel has the best sound system. So the whistles and the bells. If you're talking about history, I think American Flyer, the mechanical choo-choo sound that they had in their locomotives, worked off of a gear-driven piston unit. That, to me, is the best.
In 1995, Lionel came very close to producing a model of the Empire State Express J3A Hudson. The design department repainted a three-rail Smithsonian Dreyfus in Empire State Express colors and took it to the Train Collectors Association convention in York, Pennsylvania. The reception was enthusiastic, but the project was abandoned when it became apparent that putting the streamlined style locomotive on a 700E chassis just wouldn't look right. In 1995, Lionel endured another corporate change when Richard Kughn sold the majority of his interest to Wellspring Associates and rocker Neil Young. In his 9-year tenure as owner, Kughn reestablished Lionel as a strong company known for making a quality product. It was the new regime's plan to build on that reputation. What better way to start than by making another Hudson? So in 1996, in their first catalog, the new Lionel announced not one, but two Hudsons. One was a reissue of the Postwar 773. The other, an all-new model of the streamlined Commodore Vanderbilt. The 773 type was scratched, but later would be produced as part of the Century Club. But the Commodore Vanderbilt was produced, and it became the most controversial Lionel engine ever.
The idea of the Commodore Vanderbilt came from Neil Young back in October when they bought the company. I was in design, and he came in the day of the sale and announced that himself and Wellspring Associates took over the company and locked the doors in our department, and no one can come in, and that was our project to do for 3 or 4 months.
This was known as Project X, actually, and this was kept very, very quiet. We had a special team room that was secure, and our instructions were not to discuss it outside of that room.
The real Commodore Vanderbilt was America's first streamlined steam locomotive. Actually, it was just the old 5344 J1E with a bathtub-shaped cover dropped over its boiler. The announcement of the Commodore Vanderbilt was greeted with great enthusiasm, but when it was delivered, that enthusiasm turned to great disappointment. The disappointment stemmed from the color. It was wrong.
The drawings in the catalog, they went back to the artist conceptions, you know, which was very romantic. I mean, it's like I'm drooling at the mouth over this thing when I saw it in the catalog, and I had to have one, you know. And I got one. And I've seen other ones. I've never seen mine because I take it out of the box. But it's a beautiful engine. But unfortunately, they didn't paint it the right color. They were told umpteen times very adamantly that it was supposed to be a much darker gunmetal gray, and they proceeded to paint it basically silver instead. And I don't know if that was done intentionally so they can make a gunmetal gray one later like they did here so they can sell, but they didn't make very many of these either, so they sure didn't clean up making these.
Lionel received a paint chip from DuPont, the company that supplied the original paint to the New York Central. So Lionel proceeded, confident they had the right color.
I called their archivist at DuPont, which so perfectly named George Rust. Believe it or not, that's his name, at DuPont. And he sent me a tan that was used inside the cab, and the color of gray that they said that was painted in. They shrouded that engine twice, too, so no one can either confirm or not confirm the actual color. DuPont swears by that shade that we used, that was it.
It is accepted by railroad historians that the color of the original Commodore Vanderbilt was a dark metallic gray. The historians believe the chip sent to Lionel was the trim color, which was a lighter gray. However, it is easy to dispute the dark gray premise because of the metallic paint. It reflected light, and in photographs, the Commodore Vanderbilt appears to have been painted in many different shades, from black to silver. Adding to the confusion was the fact that the Commodore Vanderbilt was shrouded twice. This is evidenced by the skull and drivers in this shot taken in 1935. The original Commodore was equipped with spoke drivers.
And I had many conversations with Lionel at the time, trying to convince him that it was a dark gunmetal gray. As far as I'm concerned, it was completely wrong, and I've never seen a picture of it that looked even close to that, even a black and white picture. And in my conversations with Lionel, they said, well, depending on the lighting, it'll look light or dark, and you know, we can take this and make it look dark. And I says, what do? Just turn off the lights in the room or what, you know?
And I had the letter from Carl Cantola, who was the mechanical design engineer for the New York Central, who was in charge of streamlining that engine in the Commodore Vanderbilt form. And he stated what the color was, what they called it. And they called it black metallic lacquer. Cantola said they added a gray metallic substance of some kind that they mixed up into the black paint. And if you look very carefully at the model as we painted it, you'll see a gray tint in it. It is not a deep black.
In 1997, Lionel produced a weathered Commodore Vanderbilt.
It was my idea, as a matter of fact. We were in a meeting with the president at the time, and it come to our attention that we had all the parts and the shells and everything just had to be assembled and boxed up and shipped, and so how can we make those different? And some ideas came up. And I mentioned, why don't we just weather it? And boom. So next day, or when they were ready to weather them, I was out in the plant watching everyone get weathered and telling the painters more on that one or less out of that gun and so forth. And we weathered them all and packaged them up and sent them out, and they were gone within a week. And I think they're one of the more collectible Commodores out there at the moment.
The weathered version was not accepted any better than the first too light gray version, but because it was produced in such low numbers, it is scarce and sought after by collectors.
Well, I don't think the toy train industry or the market really has accepted weathered trains yet. People want to buy a train that looks new. These look like they're used and damaged.
In 1999, in another attempt to appease their critics, Lionel produced a dark gray Commodore Vanderbilt. It came with sintered iron drivers with simulated spokes, similar to those used on the 773. Lionel also produced the Commodore Vanderbilt in red and blue paint schemes. Both were a tribute to pre-war Commodore Vanderbilts, the 265E Blue Streak and the 264E Red Comet. These two scale Vandies were made in low numbers, but according to some collectors, not low enough.
Who knows what they're going to do next? Pink, maybe?
In 1997, Lionel announced a new heritage line of trains, and the featured locomotive was a scale Hudson numbered 5344. The only similarity with the original 5344 was the number. The casting was rough and nowhere near the quality standard set by previous Hudsons. Command control necessitated plastic handrail stanchions, and a plastic sleeve fitted over the section of handrail that bends around the boiler hinges. The plastic wrap looks awful. The dull-looking skull and disc drivers were accurate, but they look awful too, like black walls on a '57 Chevy. And the tender was worse than the engine. It is a B&O type Vanderbilt oil tender, which was never used with a New York Central Hudson. The Vandy tender was the idea of then marketing manager Jim Bunty.
All the purists from every New York Central voice in the world came speaking out on that one.
The correct tender would have been a PT type. This misstep was reminiscent of the Penzie tender gaff from 1964. Lionel's first weathered train was headed by a Norfolk and Western J. It was known as the War Horse. It was designed to represent a train in its final days of use, dirty and sounding tired and ready for the scrapyard. The second train in this series was a 773 type Hudson in Santa Fe markings. Although it said Santa Fe, it looked like a New York Central Hudson. A Santa Fe Hudson has a bigger smokestack, bulkier sand dome, and the side rods and eccentric gears are a totally different design. The catalog pictured the Santa Fe Hudson with spoke drivers, which were correct. But the production model came with skull and disc drivers, which were incorrect. No Santa Fe Hudson ever came with skull and disc drivers. Lionel offered replacement spoke drivers to those who wanted to change them. When the new regime took control of Lionel in late 1995, they immediately set out to exploit the Lionel name and traditions. A club was created where members would pay a fee for the right to buy 5 Lionel classic locomotives. The last engine to be issued would be an updated version of the 773 Hudson from 1950. This new 773 would be released in 2000 to coincide with Lionel's 100th anniversary.
We tried to make it as true to the original as possible and yet enhance it with all of today's technology. The GG1 was quite popular as well, but I would say, yeah, the 773 Hudson was one of the most popular ones, right?
The tender was a 2426 RS type with rail sounds. It was lettered New York Central like the tender in the 1950 catalog. Like other Century Club engines, the 773 came with gold-plated accents, a whistle and bell. And also, like other Century Club engines, it came packaged in a sturdy blue box with copies of the original blueprints. The new 773 was a good model. They even added the valve guide. For their 100th anniversary, Lionel produced a spectacular gold-plated scale Hudson. Equipped with all of the latest technology, The glittering model came with a display case, matching gold-plated caboose, even gloves. Eventually, Lionel, like other model train manufacturers, will move their production to the Far East. This will make the Gold Hudson, made in the anniversary year of 2000, the last Lionel Hudson made in America. The Century Club was a moneymaker for Lionel, so no one was surprised when Lionel announced Century Club 2. Nor was anybody surprised when it was announced that Century Club 2 would include as its last offering another Hudson.
We wanted to do yet another Hudson, and we thought that the streamlined Empire State Express would be the one that would fit very nicely with the rest of the products we had picked for Century Club 2. Still, even as we're doing this Century Club 2, we are still getting feedback from our customers, and like we said earlier, those guys really help us decide what we should do next.
Lionel ceased domestic production of trains in 2001. Now they would look to other companies located in Asia to produce trains according to their specifications. Among the first trains produced by Lionel's offshore suppliers was a scale J3A Hudson. The real J3A was more powerful and efficient than the older J1 and J2 Hudsons. Lionel's J3A Hudson is brand new, incorporating new tooling and new technology. Die-cast modeling has improved greatly since Lionel's pioneering days of the 1930s. Now sharper and precise details can be cast into the mold. Other minute details such as builder plates, illuminated classification lights, and number boards can also be produced. For this new era of locomotive production, Lionel chose cab number 5444, which represents the engine's distant relation to the legendary 5344. Some nice decorative details include graphite boiler front and New York Central nameplate under the headlight. Graphite was used on the real Hudsons because paint would bubble from the intense heat. And finally, the tender includes a backup light. Gone now are the days of the storied Pullmore motor. It served the hobby well, but the new maintenance-free DC can motors are more powerful and less expensive. No more noise or smell of ozone. With all the design and performance improvements of the new Hudson, one curious aspect of these foreign-produced locomotives concerns the side rod action. The original 700E featured majestic interacting motion among the various side and linkage rods. What you are looking at is pre-World War II modeling technology. The new Hudsons feature the basic movements of the drive and eccentric rods, but the radius rod and other levers are static. There's no sliding valve. Even a small detail, such as the lubricator linkage, is missing from the new Hudsons. Maybe the problem is the engineers in Asia never got to see the real thing in operation. When the original 700E was designed, Hudsons were running constantly between New York State and Chicago.
Your Central 5444 takes the green.
A specific aesthetic issue customers raised with the new J3A was the inclusion of classification lights. Although many J3As had classification lights, most of them did not. Also, the catalog depiction showed the 5444 with box POC drivers. But the production model came with Scullen disc drivers. Ten years after Lionel's experimental brass models of the streamlined 20th Century Limited locomotive were released, Lionel finally made a sturdy die-cast model of the Dreyfus. The brass models were used as guides for the decoration. It's a nice-looking model, which captures the style of the Art Deco age. The only aesthetic drawback is that black screws were used to secure the silver drivers onto the axles. They stand out and actually look like holes in the center of the Scullen disc drivers. The locomotive has 8 separate lights, more than any other single locomotive Lionel has ever produced. There's a headlight, cab light, and 6 work lights positioned over the drivers. A set of 6 matching O-gauge passenger cars were produced almost a year later. These are the traditional 15-inch toy-size cars, not scale. In spite of the size, they look good with the Dreyfus Hudson and have impressive interior detail, not just simple silhouette window strips.
Attention passengers, the 20th Century Limited is now arriving on platform 1.
A 7th car with additional sounds was also produced.
Loud departing, 20th Century Limited, all aboard. Your Central 5452, you are cleared outbound.
When Lionel announced plans that production of trains would no longer be done in the United States, they marketed a traditional Berkshire as being the last Lionel locomotive made in the U.S. Sometime later, a small group of 773 Hudsons was sold directly to Lionel's top dealers. There was no announcement of this production. But as the word spread among collectors of their existence, the question was asked as to whether these were really the last locomotives produced in America.
NYC 773, you are cleared outbound.
Lionel's response was that these are leftovers from the Century Club 773 production. The only difference is that these do not have the golden bell and whistle decorations, and Century is not stamped on the tender. Lionel produced standard gauge trains between 1906 and 1939. The large whimsical trains were made of tin plate and painted in vibrant colors. In 2001, Lionel again entered this niche market. By producing the Hiawatha, Lionel offered a train that was never offered in standard gauge. It was a landmark production on many levels, including being the first standard gauge Hudson and the first scale detailed standard gauge train. The cars were longer than even the Grand State Set cars. The locomotive featured the customary modern enhancements like rail sounds and command control. It was enthusiastically received and praised for its beauty. After the success of the Hiawatha, Lionel offered another new standard gauge train, a model of the Commodore Vanderbilt. It was an accurate enough looking model as far as standard gauge goes, but because of its dark and somber colors, it didn't really fit in the traditional standard gauge look. Lionel followed their new J3A Hudson with a slightly modified version based on feedback from their first model. The classification lights were removed, and new box-pock drivers were included. The cylinder heads had a polished look. These changes made the 5433 a more acceptable model of the New York Central J3A. It is interesting to note that both J3As have the pre-war serif lettering. It came in a set with 4 heavyweight Pullmans decorated as post-war Irvington cars. Called the 50th anniversary set, it was meant to represent a modern scale version of one of Lionel's most collectible post-war era passenger trains, the 773 with Irvington cars from 1950. An extra sound car with the name Hillside was offered separately. The anniversary set is a name collectors have given Lionel's Union Pacific Alco passenger set from 1950.
New York Central 5433, take the green.
Lionel's homage to the 773 set was the idea of Neil Young. Even if operators weren't interested in running the whimsical heavyweights behind the scale Hudson, one could always use the locomotive to pull the Pullman heavyweights from 1996 and have a sharp, prototypical looking train. When Lionel introduced the scale Hudson in 1937, it was dubbed the scale model of the century. Now, over 60 years later, the legend endures.